Angry woman at Sandra Bullock in first-class lounge. Keanu Reeves' reaction shocks everyone. Sandra Bullock sat quietly in the first-class lounge at LAX, sipping her tea and scrolling through her phone. It was meant to be a peaceful wait before her flight to London, but that peace was about to be shattered. A woman in her mid-50s, dressed in an expensive designer suit, strutted into the lounge, her eyes scanning the area. The moment she spotted Sandra, her face twisted into a scowl. "You!" The woman spat, marching up to Sandra's seat. Sandra looked up, startled. "Excuse me?" The woman crossed her arms. "You think you can just sit here like the rest of us? Just because you're a Hollywood star doesn't mean you get special treatment." Sandra blinked, utterly confused. This is a first-class lounge. I have a ticket." "Ha! I doubt it," the woman scoffed. "You celebrities think you own the world. I worked my whole life to afford a first-class ticket, and now I have to share this space with the likes of you?" By now, other passengers were watching. Some whispered, others pulled out their phones, sensing a scene. And then a calm, familiar voice broke through the tension. "Hey, Sandra, everything okay?" All heads turned. Keanu Reeves, dressed in his signature black jacket and jeans, had just walked into the lounge. He had been on the same flight, and seeing the commotion, he naturally stepped in. Sandra gave him a helpless shrug. "Apparently, I don't belong here." Keanu turned to the woman, his face unreadable. "Ma'am, are you saying Sandra doesn't deserve to be here?" "Exactly," the woman huffed. "People like her." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his voice even and controlled. "People like her? You mean hard-working professionals who have spent decades perfecting their craft just like you did with your career?" The woman opened her mouth, then closed it. Keanu continued, his voice never rising but carrying immense weight. "Do you know who paid for Sandra's first acting lessons? Who believed in her before Hollywood did?" He paused. "She did. She earned this seat, just like you did." Silence. The woman's bravado crumbled. The entire lounge seemed to hold its breath. Sandra, amused, leaned in. "And in case you're wondering, I did pay for my ticket. Want to see the receipt?" The woman stammered, looking anywhere but at them. I must have been mistaken." Keanu smiled, his signature kindness shining through. "No worries. We'll make mistakes. Have a great flight." The woman quickly gathered her things and walked away, her face burning with embarrassment. Sandra turned to Keanu, shaking her head. "You just Jedi mind-tricked her into an apology." Keanu chuckled. "I prefer the term gentle persuasion." As the tension in the room melted away, the other passengers resumed their conversations, impressed by Keanu's effortless diplomacy. Sandra sighed, raising her cup. "Here's to flying first class with style." Keanu grabbed the coffee from the counter and took a seat next to her, and without unnecessary drama, hopefully. They clinked their drinks together, two Hollywood legends handling life's unexpected moments, one smooth reaction at a time. "Ha! Angry woman at Sandra Bullock in first-class lounge. Keanu Reeves' reaction shocks everyone." The tension in the first-class lounge had settled, but the awkwardness still lingered. Sandra Bullock smirked as she took a sip of her tea, glancing at Keanu Reeves, who sat next to her with his usual calm demeanor. "You always do that, don't you?" she said, shaking her head. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Diffuse situations like some kind of Zen master. You don't even raise your voice and suddenly people rethink their entire life choices." Keanu chuckled, sipping his coffee. "I don't think it was that deep." Sandra leaned in, lowering her voice. "That woman? She looked ready to call security on me, and you just Jedi mind-tricked her into walking away in shame. That's a skill, my friend." Keanu smiled but didn't say anything. He had always believed that kindness and understanding could do more than anger ever could. Just as they were about to return to their peaceful wait, a nervous-looking airport employee approached them. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Bullock," the young man said hesitantly. I just wanted to apologize for what happened earlier. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here, and I want to make sure you're comfortable." Sandra waved him off with a friendly smile. "Oh, don't worry. Keanu here handled it better than any security team could." The employee chuckled, but still looked concerned. "Still, if there's anything we can do to make up for it, maybe an extra drink or—" Keanu shook his head. "We're good. Just happy to be here." The young man nodded, clearly relieved, and left them alone. Sandra sighed, stretching her arms. "So London, huh?" Keanu nodded. Yep, got some meetings, maybe a little sightseeing if I have time. Sandra smirked. They'd better not be trying to cast you in another action movie where you barely get any lines. You know, you can play other characters. Keanu chuckled. I know, but the fans like me shooting bad guys and looking broody, so... Sandra laughed. True, but you should do another rom-com, like Speed, but, you know, with less explosions. Keanu thought for a moment, then smiled. Only if you're in it. Sandra's eyes widened playfully. Oh, now you're just flattering me. Before she could respond further, a commotion near the lounge entrance caught their attention. The same woman who had confronted Sandra earlier was now arguing with another airport staff member. This time she wasn't just upset, she was fuming. I demand an upgrade, she shouted. I know there are better seats available. Ma'am, the staff member said patiently, we cannot upgrade you just because you're unhappy with your seat. First class is already the highest level available on this flight. Then switch me to another plane, the woman screeched, making several passengers turn their heads. Sandra and Keanu exchanged looks. She really doesn't know when to quit, does she? Sandra whispered. Keanu exhaled and stood up, much to Sandra's amusement. Oh no, she murmured. Here we go again. Keanu walked over to the woman and the staff member, standing with his usual relaxed posture. Ma'am, he said in a calm tone. The woman turned, her face still twisted with frustration. The moment she saw Keanu, her expression faltered. Oh, it's you. Keanu smiled slightly. You seem stressed. Traveling can be exhausting. The woman huffed. I am stressed. I paid for first class, and I expect first-class treatment. Keanu nodded. Understandable, but making someone else's day worse won't make yours better. The woman hesitated. The quiet authority in his voice was hard to ignore. You don't know what kind of day I've had, she muttered, crossing her arms. Keanu tilted his head. You're right. I don't. But I do know that carrying angered you everywhere makes every day worse. Maybe take a deep breath. Let go of the bad energy. The woman pursed her lips, looking around. People were watching. The same people who had seen her lash out at Sandra. Slowly, her face softened. Keanu gestured toward the lounge. Come sit down. Have some tea. You might feel better. The woman looked at him, then at the lounge, then at the staff member who was watching in shock. After a long pause, she sighed. Fine. She followed Keanu back inside, sitting a few seats away from Sandra. Sandra leaned in as Keanu sat down. You just invited her to sit here. Keanu shrugged. People change when you treat them like humans, not enemies. Sandra shook her head, laughing. I swear, Keanu, if you ever decide to start a cult, people would join without question. Keanu grinned. Only if you're my co-leader. Sandra snorted, sipping her tea. Pass. Too much work, but I'll write the rom-com about it. As the minutes passed, the lounge returned to normal. The woman sat quietly, sipping her drink. She wasn't arguing, she wasn't scowling, she was just resting. And maybe, just maybe, she had learned something from Keanu Reeves. As Sandra and Keanu finally boarded their flight, Sandra glanced behind her. The woman was seated a few rows away, reading a book. Sandra smirked. Well, seems like she took your advice. Keanu gave a small smile. Maybe she just needed someone to remind her that kindness still exists. Sandra chuckled. You're like a real-life monk, a monk who does his own stunts. Keanu laughed. I try my best. As the plane took off, Sandra relaxed in her seat, glancing at her old friend. Flying first class was great. Flying first class with Keanu Reeves, even better. Angry woman that Sandra Bullock in first class lounge. Keanu Reeves' reaction shocks everyone. Part 3. The flight. The plane soared into the sky, leaving Los Angeles behind. Sandra Bullock settled into her plush first-class seat, stretching her legs with a satisfied sigh. Keanu Reeves sat beside her, his usual calm presence making the entire journey feel effortlessly peaceful. I have to say, Sandra mused, adjusting her seat, I don't think I've ever flown first class with this much pre-flight drama. Keanu chuckled. Yeah, that was different. Sandra stole a glance over her shoulder at the woman from the lounge. To her surprise, the once angry stranger now sat quietly, sipping a drink and reading a book. The difference was almost shocking. Look at her, Sandra whispered to Keanu. You practically performed an exorcism on her anger. Keanu smirked, his eyes still on his own book. I think she just needed someone to remind her to breathe. Sandra rolled her eyes playfully. And of course, you were that someone. The flight attendants made their rounds, offering gourmet meals and champagne. Sandra picked at a salad while Keanu sipped his usual black coffee, lost in thought. Then the unexpected happened. The plane shook. A sudden sharp jolt rippled through the cabin, making several passengers gasp. Sandra instinctively gripped the armrests, exchanging a glance with Keanu. His face remained unreadable, but his grip on the tray table tightened. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the pilot's voice over the speakers, "we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Another jolt. This time it felt stronger. A ripple of unease spread through the first-class cabin. Sandra exhaled slowly. "I hate turbulence," she muttered. Keanu turned to her, his voice calm. "It'll pass." The woman from the lounge, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly stiffened in her seat. Her face turned pale, her hands gripping the armrests as her book slipped to the floor. Sandra noticed immediately. "Hey, are you okay?" The woman shook her head, her breath coming in short gasps. I hate flying. I can't do this." Her panic was rising fast. Sandra glanced at Keanu, but he was already moving. He unbuckled his seatbelt slightly and leaned toward the woman. "What's your name?" The woman barely registered his voice. Her eyes were wide with fear. "Mom," Keanu said again, more gently. "What's your name?" The woman blinked, her breath still shallow. "Claire," she finally whispered. Keanu nodded. "Okay, Claire, I want you to take a slow, deep breath. Right now. Just focus on me, all right?" Claire tried but failed. Her hands trembled. "What if something happens?" Keanu's voice remained even. "I promise you, nothing's going to happen. Widely, the pilots know what they're doing." Sandra watched in amazement. Keanu wasn't just saying words. His entire energy was calming. The way he looked at Claire, the way his voice never wavered, it was working. "Breathe in through your nose," Keanu instructed. "Hold it for 3 seconds. Claire followed, barely. "Now, out through your mouth." She exhaled. Keanu gave a small nod. "Good. Again." Sandra couldn't believe what she was seeing. After a few more breaths, Claire's shaking slowed. But the terror in her eyes faded, just a little. Keanu smiled. "See? You're already doing better." Claire let out a shaky laugh. "You're really good at this." Keanu leaned back in his seat. "I've had my fair share of turbulence." Sandra nudged him. "You mean in the air or in life?" Keanu smirked. "Both." The turbulence faded a few minutes later, and the tension in the cabin eased. Passengers relaxed, conversations resumed, and the flight attendants continued their rounds as if nothing had happened. Claire took a deep breath and turned to Keanu. I guess I should apologize for earlier." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "You guess?" Claire let out a tired chuckle. "All right, I definitely should. I was rude to you in the lounge. I guess I was just having a bad day." Keanu nodded, his expression warm. "We all have them." Sandra crossed her arms. "And I guess the next time you see a celebrity in an airport lounge, you'll remember that they also buy their own tickets." Claire laughed. "Yeah, lesson learned." A comfortable silence settled between them. Claire relaxed for the first time since boarding, and Sandra found herself enjoying the moment. As the flight continued, the three of them found themselves chatting. About travel, about movies, even about life. By the time they landed in London, Claire had gone from being the angry woman in the lounge to someone who had shared a moment of real human connection with two of the biggest stars in Hollywood. As they gathered their things and prepared to disembark, Claire hesitated. Then she turned to Keanu and Sandra. "I know this is probably weird," she said, "but thank you. Both of you." Keanu gave her a small bow. "Safe travels, Claire." Sandra grinned. "And hey, next time you see me in an airport, maybe just say hi instead of yelling." Claire laughed. "Deal." As she walked off into the busy terminal, Sandra turned to Keanu, shaking her head. "You have this weird effect on people, you know that?" Keanu shrugged. "Just treating people like people." Sandra smiled. "Yeah, well, that's why everybody loves you, Keanu." Keanu chuckled as they grabbed their bags and stepped into the bustling London airport. Some flights are just flights, but this one was a story worth telling.